Hello, my name is Clara Cantos Delgado, and I'm a PhD student from Complutense University of Madrid. Welcome to my talk, The Perfect Coffee Brew or Fabulous Flavorful Latte, a linguistic study of gender stereotypes in AI-generated Tinder profiles. I'm going to start by providing some context. So you must know that nowadays most people find their partners online. However, in this kind of context, the profile is the most important element, as both in most apps, both people need to swipe right, as meaning they need to like each other's profile in order to be able to talk. Hence, why many people may turn to open AI-powered language models such as ChatGPT in order to improve their profiles and get more matches. However, as you know or not, ChatGPT 3 has been found to sometimes replicate gender or cultural stereotypes, and this may give the idea that it's preferable to self-present in a stereotypical manner instead of an authentic one. Consequently, this study intends to see if ChatGPT 3 does indeed promote gender stereotypes when instructed to create Tinder profiles. This has been done following a qualitative methodology in which 20 Tinder profiles belonging to both heterosexual and non-heterosexual men and women were created by instructing ChatGPT 3 to do so. In order to provide visuals for this presentation, Image Creator, the artificial intelligence by Microsoft Designer, has been used and has been fed the specific descriptions that were provided by ChatGPT-3 about the pictures that must be included alongside with the biographies. And it must be said that the tagging of the sample was conducted with help of Atlas TI. So as for the data generated, it must be mentioned that these were, even though artificial intelligence gives a different answer every time it is asked, all the profiles that were generated using ChatGPT-3 included an About Me section, which was longer than the norm. It included, however, since it was so consistent, that facilitated its analysis. It first started analyzing the hobbies, followed by a swipe right if you're looking for a statement, and finally looking for sentence which included characteristics of the preferred partner. It must be said that most of the differences could be found in the thematic analysis, so the hobbies that were associated to each one of the collectives, and the verbs, the verb usage, and also the lexicon. Finally, the presence of humor was also noted, and it was meaningful since ChatGPT had not been commanded to give humorous responses. However, in the case of certain collectives, it did. But this has not been looked into in great depth due to time constraints, but it will be looked into in the future. Now, to start, we're going to begin by exploring homosexual men's representation. It must be said that they were presented generally as associated to artistic activities, and with kind of like a vintage fascinating with the 80s or the fashion of the 20s and so on. Also, they showed up confident attitude in the way they self-presented, and the most meaningful element which was associated with a stereotype was how it included gay-sounding language. So an example of like a glittering nightlife, or like with a splash of flair and a dash of sass. Also, it must be mentioned that this was the collective which included most humorous remarks. Once again, another stereotype generally associated to homosexual men. And not like in contrast with the general stereotype, they were not presented as focused on informal encounters, but quite the opposite. They were focused on more romantic interests and interests in finding a partner, as we can see in the looking for element, in which they had quite an interest in having conversations with their partners and there was quite an interest in the acceptance of particularities, and so on. Of course, they valued artistic activities as they were presented as artistic themselves. And once again, they made humorous remarks there. Finally, it must be mentioned that they were presented as being party animals with a positive attitude. These are some of the topics that they were associated to. So, as we said, artistic activities, glamorous lifestyle, and shows. And finally, when talking about how they were presented generally as showing a radiant smile, so very smiley. Contrastively, we have heterosexual men. Heterosexual men were very stereotypical. They were presented as adventurous and outdoorsy, kind of like living in the moment, so showing this kind of like you only live once attitude. Also very confident, and they showed something that I've called the Aladdin complex, as a kind of like a wink to Disney's film Aladdin, in which there's this song, the I Can Show You the World. So they were presented as people who were looking for curious partners to respond their queries and kind of like solve their life's mysteries for them. So they were looking for, we'll begin with someone with a Jasmine Sari complex. So someone ready to discover and having loads of questions that they could answer. They were looking for someone, so not very committed. And then they generally bonded through activities. So they wanted somebody who could share in their interests. Finally, these are some of the elements that they were associated with. So generally tech related, as job oriented, and finally very like adventurous and outdoorsy. Then when we looked at the images, they were presented as being like playful and having a genuine or confident smile or smirk. And then we have heterosexual women. Heterosexual women were presented as spontaneous, also very focused on kind of like traditionally ladylike activities such as dance or creativity, reading, writing, also having some culinary interests, an interest in cultivating their mind, and the classics, so kind of like vintage activities. They were also presented as having a bit of a Jasmine complex, so very adventurous. I mean, kind of like being adventurous, but looking for somebody who would like bring the adventure to them, and like very curious, and also with a certain number of humor. Then for the looking for section, we could see that they used someone as an appellative as well. And they were interested in somebody who would appreciate their spontaneity, and they were and somebody who would have an Aladdin complex, so someone who would share their passion with them, or would just like tell them stories or explain things to them. They were also presented in a very romantic way, so looking for a romantic connection, and finally with a kind of like a slow living carpe diem attitude. And these are some of the hobbies that they were associated with. So as we have said, very traditionally ladylike attitudes, such as like reading, writing, the arts, like some vintage and classics activities. And then their eyes were always showing curiosity, and also very like smiley people, so kind of like being like peaceful and easygoing. And just to finish, we have lesbian women. Lesbian women were presented in a bit of a special way, as in they were kind of like something in between heterosexual men and homosexual women. I mean, heterosexual women, sorry. So they would have these adventurous elements from heterosexual men, like traditionally stereotypical heterosexual attributes, heterosexual male attributes, and then these traditionally like heterosexual female attributes, as in having an interest for cozy hotspots, and like spontaneity, and then slow living. So the two elements that were kind of like unique to them were their dreamer attitude, and then their interest in environmental activism. And finally, one of the most extended stereotypes that was associated with this collective, that is associated still, is this idea of the U-Haul, so how they move into very serious relationships very fast. And as we can see, especially in the looking for section here, um, in the interesting commitment, we can see that this was also portrayed as in they were interested in like setting roots really fast, or like just moving in together, or like waking up next to each other and so on. Once again, we have this idea of the double kind of like Aladdin Jasmine complex that switches from one to the other, as they were, for instance, this quote here. If you're curious about the world, so if you are so kind of like showing an Aladdin complex here, or just want to share plant care tips, so in here they're Jasmine complex. And what's one of the things that I found interesting was that they were looking for like a very spiritual, emotional connection. They were looking for fellow dreamers, kindred spirits, when other collectives were looking just for someone. So they also showed an interest in personal growth. These are some of the activities that they were interested in, generally very artistic and very related to the environment. And as we have mentioned, some sports and adventures, and also some like coffee and tea, more cozy activities. And finally, they were associated to having like dreamy eyes, or like sparkling eyes, so kind of like very active inner world kind of. So just to wrap it up, here are some conclusions. It can be said that ChatGPT 3 was likely to replicate stereotypes that have been associated to these four collectives. So transsexual men were portrayed as the macho man stereotype, as adventurous, kind of like showing this Aladdin complex, being very competitive. Homosexual men were presented as being, well, ambassadors of gay talk. Also like very popular, very smiley, very like happy to be alive kind of people. Heterosexual women were presented in a very like aesthetic and somehow sexualized way as well. Not necessarily in the text, but especially in the pictures, as you might have noticed throughout my presentation. And also like related to like very ladylike activities such as reading, writing, cultivating the mind, cultivating the arts. And finally, lesbian women were presented as being kind of like highly spiritual individuals who were into like being environmental activists, and also very relationship driven. So we have with this now reached the end of my presentation. I will be very happy to answer any questions that you may have